All right, welcome everybody. I am Larissa Bianco. I'm one of the directors here at AMI, and I am joined by our staff, Kathleen Moore, who's the director of the fellowship, and Lucy, who is the director of development. So it's really exciting that we're all able to be here with you guys, and want to introduce Dr. Joseph Hattrop and Dr. David Arias. But briefly, before we jump into the cohort, I'll just give you a little background on AMI. So 5 years ago, it was 6 years ago now, John Johnson and Brian Long started Albertus Magnus. They were at St. Mary's College in the Integral Humanities program and fell in love with the liberal arts and liberal education and believe that it is an education that we should try to make accessible to everybody, right? Costs a lot of money to go to liberal arts college. Some people find it so much later in life after they have their undergrad or their master's or their PhD. And this is something that they wanted to make an option for everybody. So they came up with the Magnus Fellowship. And it's now been going for 5 years. We have 1,000 fellows, 35 courses in our archives, and we have a beautifully, extremely diverse fellowship. We have homeschool moms, we have judges and lawyers and teachers and stay-at-home moms, all sorts of people. They're demographically diverse, they're pedagogically diverse, their educational backgrounds are all different, but they're all here because everyone who joins the Magnus Fellowship is seeking something deeper than they've ever been able to get, right? A liberal arts or a liberal education, seeking what Dr. Arias always calls the best and most noble things. So they joined us, and now we've had a request for more. If you know anything about the fellowship, you know we've been offering free courses that are sort of all over the map when it comes to great books and liberal arts. We've offered Euclid with Dr. Seeley. We've offered Tony Esolen has offered a course on Dante. We just Lord of the Rings with Dr. Free, but people are asking for something a little bit more cohesive. And so the dream of the cohort was born. It's a 3-year program that goes through what we try to make a full liberal arts education as much as we can with this sort of a platform. So that's why we're here. We launched our first one last year, and now we're hoping to launch our second year. So I will pass it over to Dr. Arias and Dr. Hattrop if you two want to introduce yourselves. So I should have said that they will be our celebrity faculty leading the cohorts. I don't know how John does this, but he poaches some pretty incredible people. I know they're both full-time professors, homeschool parents, lots and lots of kids. So very busy lives, but we are so incredibly grateful that you all are giving so much of your lives and your times for this program. So Dr. Arias, I'll start with you. If you can introduce yourself. And then before you talk about the cohort, we'll pass it over to Dr. Hattrop and allow him to introduce himself. And then if you want to talk a little bit about the cohort and the value of the cohort, just give your little cohort spiel after you two introduce yourselves.
Sure, I'd be happy. Thanks, Larissa, just for kicking it off. So yeah, my name is David Arias, and I guess I've been more or less with Magnus since the inception. I've done a number of classes, just some of the regular classes, and it's really been great. It's been an honor to be part of the Magnus Institute. The students have been awesome, and more recently, I've been involved in the cohort, and I'm teaching the second cohort. I'm teaching my second cohort class, I should say. And again, it's just been a real joy to be with the students. They're serious, they're dedicated, and it's really neat to have the same group of students that we meet with week after week. And I think we're really getting somewhere in the studies that we're doing. So yeah, and then just in terms of my background, so when I'm not teaching for Albertus Magnus, I mean, my real full-time job is I teach at Our Lady of Guadalupe Seminary in Denton, Nebraska. I teach philosophy there, and I had the great joy of teaching at Thomas Aquinas College for 11 years prior to coming to the seminary. I taught with Dr. Hattrop there. We overlapped for a good number of years, and he's a dear friend. We go way back, and it's great just to be able to be with him again. teaching online. We don't have our offices down the hall from each other anymore, but it's still cool to be virtually connected. And then in my spare time, I help with the homeschooling, as Larissa mentioned. My wife and I are blessed to we have 14 kids, and we just recently became grandparents as well. So that's been a kind of surreal, but a very awesome transition. And we're overjoyed with that, my wife and I are. So that's all I'll say about myself.
Okay, so maybe I'll introduce myself. Again, I'm Joseph Hatrick. I am a full-time tutor at Thomas Aquinas College. I've been there for nearly 20 years now. As Dr. Arias mentioned, we overlapped for a while there, and we've been together ever since. Well, I guess we were both undergraduates at Thomas Aquinas together, and then we were together in graduate school. So we've been around the bend, and I too have really been one of the benefits to me of being involved with Albertus Magnus is being able to spend more time with David again. It's been a real pleasure. And so I'm a tutor at Thomas Aquinas College. There it's a liberal arts great books curriculum, and the faculty, as much as possible, try to teach through the whole program, which means we teach a whole slew of courses, which is in a way a nice preparation for something like this that Albertus Magnus is doing, because there's a lot of disciplines that are covered there currently. So my PhD is in philosophy, but currently I'm teaching non-Euclidean geometry and Einstein's relativity, which is quite an adventure. My wife and I also homeschool. I have 6 daughters at home. My oldest was just accepted to Thomas Aquinas, so she'll be starting as a freshman at Thomas Aquinas this fall. And life is moving on there. I've been helping out with Albertus Magnus for, I guess, 2-3 years now. I got started a little later than Dr. Arias did, but I did a class a couple years ago on Aristotle's categories, and then I taught my first cohort class last fall, I guess over the winter, the logic tutorial. And that was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed working with the groups that AMI gets together, and looking forward to another year.
Yeah, thank you both so much. Would you actually, there's one more person that I want to introduce. Ryan, he is a fellow at AMI, and he's a member of the cohort. So I don't want to take up your whole evening, Ryan, but thank you so much for being here. It was so nice of him to come and introduce himself and meet you all. So before we pass it over and go more into detail on the cohort, would you mind just saying a word or introducing yourself?
Yeah, hi, my name is Ryan, and yeah, I've been part of Magnus now since the cohort started. I actually was part of it much earlier, but I didn't have chances to take any of the earlier classes. So when I heard that the cohort was coming together, I was very excited, because it does offer us to be able to interact with each other, and not just watch recordings. And I think that interaction between the students and then I guess you could say, the lecturer, even though they're not quite lecturers, or Dr. Hatchett and Dr. Arias, like, people we're in conversation with. Maybe that's all I'll say. So it's nice to be able to have feedback with them. But yeah, it's really great. It's bore a lot of good fruit for me already, and I think anyone who is thinking about joining will find the same.
Thanks, Ryan. And if you have anything to interject throughout the evening, if you want to jump something in there, any question for the Q&A session or anything. But all right, I'll turn it over to you two. Could you two just speak about, maybe walk us through, okay, what is the cohort? Why is it set up the way that it is for 3 years? And what is the value of that the pattern of the cohort?
Sure. Joe, I don't know if you're okay with me kind of getting the ball rolling, or
That's right, David. You go for it. Yeah, I'll let you take the lead here.
Okay, well, I was just going to say, just kind of by way of sort of big picture introduction, I think it's fair to say that for thousands of years, the wise have recognized that amongst all of the different kinds of educations that a human person can receive, there's one that is best and most perfective of us as human persons, and that education has come to be known as liberal education, or the education that's proper to the free man. And there's a quote from St. John Henry Newman's An Idea of the University, where he describes this sort of education in very broad terms. And here's what he says, just a brief quote. He says, "This process of training, by which the intellect, instead of being formed or sacrificed to some particular or accidental purpose, some specific trade or profession or study or science, is disciplined for its own sake, for the perception of its own proper object, and for its own highest culture, is called liberal education." Okay, so there he's describing it in very, very broad terms, this highest and this best kind of education that we can receive, and it has many parts to it. And liberal education, as he's describing it here, he's just describing it at a natural level. There, of course, is a supernatural level to this education. Liberal education, in this general sense, is ordered to the study of sacred theology, right, to the triune God, insofar as he reveals himself to us in Scripture and sacred tradition. And again, this education, it has many parts, many components, and oftentimes people will talk about the liberal arts when they hear the term liberal education. And I think it's fair to say that the liberal arts are one very important part of this education. And Hugh of St. Victor, he famously described the liberal arts, and there are 7 of these traditionally, as and here's another brief quote, as certain ways, or you could even translate his text as certain roads by which the lively mind may enter into the secrets of philosophy. Okay, so the 7 liberal arts, which we're going to talk about, I'm sure, as we go forward, these are like 7 roads that the lively mind makes use of in order to enter into the secrets of philosophy. So this tells you that there's something kind of introductory about these arts, that they lead to something greater than themselves. They lead to the secrets of philosophy. The secrets of philosophy, in turn, lead one into the secrets of sacred theology. So again, there's a relation here, right, between the liberal arts and liberal education in its fullness. And then we could say, of course, there's the supernatural component to liberal education, again, which is sacred theology. And the cohort, as it's been conceived by Albertus Magnus Institute, and as it's being carried out, it's really an attempt to introduce students to the liberal arts, the 7 liberal arts, in one measure or another, and then also to introduce them into some of the secrets of philosophy, I dare say. And the cohort is, well, it's 3 years in terms of the time commitment. The first year is dedicated to the arts of the Trivium. Okay, so 3 of the liberal arts. The second year is dedicated to the quadrivial arts, and there are 4 of those. So those are the 7 liberal arts. And then the third year is dedicated to philosophy. And I can just kind of enumerate the courses so you can kind of get a bird's eye view of what the cohort looks like. So in year 1, there's an introductory seminar, which in some very broad sense focuses on grammar. There's a reading of and discussion of Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. Those are the main texts of that class. Then after that, The second class is a class on logic. And then we get into a class in rhetoric, and finally a class in poetry. And the three quadrivial arts are, not surprisingly, grammar, logic, and rhetoric. So you see them to some extent covered here, at least in a sort of introductory way, in year 1 of the cohort. And then in year 2 of the cohort, there's a class in geometry, followed by a class in astronomy, there's a class in arithmetic, and there's a class in music. And I'm sure Dr. Hattrip will have something to say about those, because he's definitely more of a specialist in the arts of the quadrivium than I am. And he's really helped to put together year 2 in a very significant way. And then in the third year, the year where we study philosophy, there are 4 more classes. There's a class in what's called natural philosophy, or the philosophical study of the natural world. Then there's a second class, which is also part of natural philosophy, but it focuses specifically on the soul, okay, on the principle of life in living things, and chiefly it focuses on the human soul. And then there are 2 other classes. There's a class in moral philosophy, which studies human actions insofar as they're ordered to our ultimate end, our natural ultimate end, happiness. And there's a class in metaphysics as well, which involves the study of being as being. And anyway, so that's a very, very broad overview of things that are covered in the 3 years of the cohort. And you can see again how there's a focus on the 7 liberal arts, to the extent that we can focus on those in 2 years' time. And then there's a focus on this certain parts of philosophy, which the liberal arts lead us into. So Dr. Hattrip, I don't know if you want to kind of piggyback on anything that I said there. That's just kind of a very broad stroke overview of what's going on in the cohort through the 3 years.
I think, I mean, that it seems to me to pretty much cover the bases. I might just comment on this aspect of what you were saying there, because it's something I've been thinking about, and really strikes me just in the transition from the first 2 years to the third year, is the fact that in those first 2 years, we're talking about what are called the liberal arts. And it's interesting that those are called arts. Whereas when you're looking at the philosophical studies, those aren't called arts, right? So maybe just something that I would emphasize there is the fact that to some degree, when the human mind is trying to prepare itself for philosophical study, it has to make some things of its own that it has to think about. So it's interesting to think about how the products of the human mind are involved in its own education. So yeah, just the aspect of art, the work there strikes me as another interesting feature of the move there. Maybe you could say that by the time you get to philosophy, you're really trying to let reality speak to you as thoroughly as possible, to not put up obstacles to the pathway of communication that exists between nature and the mind. But the mind has to be prepared for that encounter with reality, and to some degree, it has to build some habits of its own by means of which it will be prepared for that. And so, yeah, the concept of art really seems to capture that idea that you're doing something to prepare yourself for philosophy, and that takes some time, and it's a serious effort, and brings a lot of rewards. And by the time you get to that third year and you're looking at the philosophical studies, you ought to be able to see by the time you get there how the things that you've been making for yourself are at work in that project. So yeah, maybe as we talk more about the Trivium and the Quadrivium, that's another aspect of that will come out. yeah, that's what occurred to me as I was listening to Dr. Arias.
So going off on that, you've talked about how they build off each other, right? How the trivium leads to the quadrivium, which leads to the philosophical science that we end with. So let's talk about our fellows after they have finished. Let's talk about like Ryan, for example. He's going through the cohort for these 3 years. What do you imagine are how our fellows will be formed? Like, how does this nourish their souls, this 3-year study that you two have just so beautifully described? Can you talk a little bit, you touched on this, of course, like how it forms the soul, but can you talk about specifically, what can our fellows hope? They've invested in all of this time, right? They're reading these texts and they're giving money to this. So what's the, who will they be at the end of the 3 years?
Hopefully they'll be liberally educated. No, it's a really interesting question, Larissa, and I mean to some extent, we don't know the full answer to that question. We're going to see it. I think we're going to see it as of the end of year 3, but we've seen the fruits of it to some extent already, and at least I want to talk to that a little bit, and maybe Dr. Hatchup will have something to say. But so I had the pleasure of doing the first course of the cohort with a group that's now doing it, and Ryan's part of that, the course on the Iliad and the Odyssey, and it was a really great group of folks and a great class. They had a good class dynamic right out of the gate, and then I wasn't with them when Dr. Hatchup taught them the second class, and now I'm back with them. And it's really interesting because I can see just from their interactions, just from their contributions in class, I can see that they've really made progress since they've been in the cohort series. So I've seen some real growth in them, and they'll refer back to things that they've learned, Dr. Hatch's class. They can refer back to texts that were brought up in the first class, the Iliad and the Odyssey. So it's really impressive to me, to see those fruits. They're taking everything, very seriously, and which I expected, but they're retaining the things, and they're clearly building in their own minds on the things that they've learned, and that's just a great thing to see. And I expect that as we move into the poetics class, that'll even become more evident, because we're going to get back to a lot of literature, which we again started with, but they will have had these various courses in between, which will enable them to appreciate, I think, literature in a new way, in a way that they haven't perhaps before. So that's a long-winded way of saying that the results remain to be seen, but to some extent they can be seen already, and I think they're very good results. I don't know if Ryan wants to speak to what he finds happening within his own intellect, but I certainly see really good signs of progress. And so I think by the end of year 3, God willing, all of the people that persevere to the end in the cohort, I think you'll be able to say, hey, look, our intellectual lives are really, they're really different from what they were before, and we view the world in a new way. We're able to read texts in a new way, and mine truths from texts in a way that we couldn't before, and so on. So that's what I'm hoping to see at the end of the 3 years.
Yeah, yeah, I'll comment on that, Larissa, about my own, I guess you can say, progress so far with 2 terms from Dr. Arias and 1 with Dr. Hatchup. I think the fruits, like I said, the fruits that I've already noticed in myself, and if Dr. Arias, maybe you could help me with this one. I know in our last class we were talking about, you know, thinking about God and sort of, I think that was what you said, like the highest good that the mind can grasp. I can't remember if that's exactly what we were saying, but I'm trying to connect that to what Dr. Hatcher was saying. I guess what I'm saying is like the things now that I'm able to think about more deeply are more broad. And the things that I've been exposed to are things that I would have not otherwise been exposed to had I not joined the cohort. So for me, it's again, it's already bore great fruit. Like one just sort of everyday, you know, example of this is I'm able to again just speak much better to those around me, and I'm able to express myself a little bit more articulately. And because I think the things we are reading are, especially after the Iliad and the Odyssey, are really, are dense for me at least. And it's forced me to flex my the muscle that is my brain a little more. So that's part of the growth. And again, it's just a very enjoyable. Again, especially with the Iliad and the Odyssey, the Iliad and the Odyssey was just really fun to read because you hear about these stories as just growing up, but you've never actually read them. And now actually reading them and being walked through them, I found that I got a lot of pleasure from this reading them and being able to understand it better. So, and I think at the end of this, the question, okay, what will be at the end of this? I think will probably be more like, I want to think about like more whole persons with a better grasp of reality, and to be able to see like the true, the good, and the beautiful in the things around us. So that's what I think we're building up to, at least for me.
Well, I just thought I would just to offer my own reflections. I really appreciate what Ryan was just saying, because I think my experience too, and my hope would be that that you'd have a couple of different things going on here, kind of working together. One of them is the teamwork going on amongst the cohort themselves. And it is just great to get a group of people talking to each other about things that really matter. Because when you're doing that, you get in the habit of conversation, and you really learn how to express yourself and how to hear other people, and how to meet them in discussion, and to really make progress together. And my great hope for this will be that that the idea of wisdom, a knowledge that's really worth having for its own sake, will come to be perceived as a common good on the one hand, but also a common good that you can really achieve, that you can really make progress in achieving, and where it's something that you see for yourself. So in our culture nowadays, with information technology and the media and all the things we have to deal with, there's just so much of a reality where you're being fed ideas. So this is what you're supposed to think about the world. This is what you're supposed to think about all sorts of human issues, whatever they might be, political, moral, religious. There's so many questions, and it really is a serious question nowadays, whether in developing yourself as a person in your education and the things that you do, even for fun, am I really developing myself into somebody who sees truth as independent of fashion, independent of fads, independent of current events? Can I see it as something independent of all those things, as timeless and everlasting, but as something that I can really possess with other people as a common good, through the discipline of my own mind? And I think that the cohort has a lot of potential to achieve those things. And I agree with Dr. Arias and with Ryan, and I think I see that happening in my experience with it already. And it's fun to see people bringing their questions to these things, and just asking all kinds of things, and really getting a discussion going. And there's a lot of freedom in that, and some really beautiful goods. So yeah.
Yeah,
with all those things.
I'm glad that came up, because I wanted to talk a little bit about, so you have both taught for us in our free courses that are 8 weeks in their standalone courses, and you have both said that in those courses you do more lecture. You lecture for about an hour, and you tell our fellows, you sort of dig out the information and present it to them rather than help them ask the questions that guide them through the text. And then so you usually lecture for an hour and then have questions for an hour. But going off on the discussion of the seminar that you just brought up, Dr. Hattrip, could you talk a little bit about more of the role of the cohort to be more seminar rather than lecture, and how you've seen that play out over the last year and your goals for the next years? I know that's also just a common question our fellows have. Is this lecture based, or is this more like a seminar you would get at a Great Books College? So yeah, you sort of just naturally led into that. So if you could, either of you, tackle that.
Yeah. Well, let me just say what my experience was in the logic class, because for me, it was very satisfying. Yeah, so when I taught the categories class a couple of years ago, that was definitely much more of a lecture presentation. There were two reasons for that. One was that it was pretty challenging material, and I knew it would be. It was kind of it was material that just kind of had to be digested and presented, because my goal there was to get some real Aristotle out on the table, give people a chance to look at it, and then ask questions. So what I was really aiming for in that class was, which was not in the cohort, but this was just a standalone class. My goal there was to give people enough material, clearly presented enough that they could ask all the questions they wanted to about it. But I was kind of looking at their participation as being actively asking questions about what had been presented to them. But with the cohort, I know we tried from the beginning to make it more seminar discussion based. And I remember last year when we had this meeting to talk about this, there were some doubts about whether that would work, especially in the Zoom environment. And I was very positive about it, but I think we all kind of felt like, yeah, we're trying this out. We're going to see how it works. Who knows how it might work? But I was pleasantly surprised at how well that went. And I do think the fact that we have a single group kind of doing these classes together, the fact that they know each other already and are doing this as a common project, really contributes to that. I think that so far as I've been able to see, that the material that people are going to be reading in the cohort is totally the kind of stuff that they can read and get into enough on their own reading that they can come in ready to discuss the text and not just need to hear a lecture from the teacher. So I think the material is very discussable in its own right. It's the kind of stuff you can have a discussion about. But also the fact that you've got a group committed to doing this, I think has really made it work so far. So I'm very confident that over the course of the time, the seminar method is going to work quite well with this, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how the group is working together and talking to each other by the third year, because there's going to be a lot of development in this group. I think you'll really see it by the end. The confidence with which they'll present their ideas, and the readiness with which they'll read some text, which by year 3 will be a little bit challenging. I mean, it's going to take some effort to really get beneath these things. But I'm very confident that the kind of growth will happen that will make that possible.
I agree with what Dr. Hattrip said. What he described as his experience really resonates with me as well. One thing I would say is in some of the other classes, some of the free classes, Larissa, in a number of those, when I taught them, I couldn't count on the students, at least, well, certainly not all of them, sometimes not even many of them, to do the reading. So I would come to class and I would assume that the majority of them hadn't done the reading, for one reason or another, just life's busy for most folks, and so I would kind of do the thing that Dr. Hattrip described, where you present them with kind of as clear of a breakdown of the material, that you're going through for that class, and then you hope that they'll on hearing those things, they'll have some good questions, and they always did, right, and it always went well. But that Q&A part of the class, it really heavily relied on the lecture part of the class. But I think with the cohort, yeah, things are really different, because you have the same group of folks that are working with each other, class after class, and they're invested in it. And I think, the cohort folks, they seem to be pretty serious about taking this on and trying to get, through the classes, through the material together. And, I depend on them week after week, having things to contribute in the discussion, and they do, and they show that they've done the reading, they've thought about the material, and they're willing to discuss it, and that's really been great, and that's a huge part of the education, just in itself, right? They're putting in the time between classes to do the reading, to think about the material, and then they come to class, and they hopefully come to a deeper understanding of the material during the class than they had beforehand. So it seems like it's been working really, really well. And I had my doubts at the beginning, to be honest, as to whether, like Dr. Hattrip said, whether the Zoom format would work well with a seminar style kind of discussion. I've had a lot of experience doing these kinds of classes live, but I wondered, how's this going to happen? How's it going to work over Zoom? Especially when you're not in the same room, you can't see each other, so you don't know if someone else is about to speak or if someone's done speaking, and so you can very easily, interrupt people or run people over just inadvertently. But right from the get-go, with our first class in the Iliad and the Odyssey, man, I mean, I was impressed with the charity with which the cohort members just interacted. They waited for their peers to speak up or to stop talking, and just the way in which they addressed each other was really great to see. And I thought, wow, this is better than I had expected. I didn't think that you could have this kind of discussion over Zoom. So they proved me wrong, but I was happy to be proved wrong there. Anyways, so yeah, so I think the seminar style class that we have in the cohort, it's really working, and it's workable over Zoom. So yeah, it's been great.
Ryan, as a fellow, do you have anything you want to, no pressure, do you have anything you want to add? Like, what's it like being in the seminar discussion on Zoom?
Yeah, I enjoy the seminar format very much. And again, I think with most of us, and again with Dr. Hattrip and Dr. Arias, there may have been thoughts about, like, how's this going to work? Like, I very much rather have them and my cohort members, like, across the table from me here at my home and talking. And I think that, that's more natural, obviously. But as far as the flow of it, I think many of us come in after maybe reading the material, kind of having like questions ready, but then the conversation, and I think as it should, will take turns in ways that maybe we weren't actually thinking about. And I think that's kind of the point, and that's really enjoyable, because we really get to again, like, see it from another person's point of view. 2 classes ago, we got to hear someone brought in, I forget who it was, Dr. Arias, the whiskey speech from this senator, and that was a lot of fun. Like, I wasn't expecting that, and it just brought a little comedic element to our class that evening. But yeah, yes, there's, through Zoom, there may be limitations, but I think we found ways to overcome those. And I think as much as each of us can, we're trying to participate and trying to, you know, add to the conversation. And that's what I think is happening with the seminar. It's a conversation. So rather than Dr. Arias or Dr. Hattrip carrying the whole thing, we try to get in there and carry some of that load too.
That's so good to hear. Lucy, you are in some of you've been moderating quite a bit, or do you want to jump in and say something or just add anything in general? Do you have any questions?
No, I mean, I think it's a phenomenal program that you know, can bring this kind of education to people who feel that they missed it somewhere along the line. Like, I feel I missed a lot of it too. I went to a Jesuit university, but then you know, as an adult, I learned about, you know, the kind of education. My sister ended up going to TAC and I was more exposed to that. And it's really amazing that you can go through a Jesuit university and come out the other end and say, wow, I think I missed it, the education. Like, when was that supposed to happen? So so I think AMI has a great program, and I think that you know, to really try to bring that to people who otherwise wouldn't have the opportunity to go back to, you know, back to school at this point in their lives. So I think it's fantastic.
David, I don't know if you wanted to say more about the liberal arts in particular, just to kind of maybe I don't know whether it'd be worthwhile to maybe give a fuller picture, maybe especially what the first 2 years look like. I know last year we developed that theme a little bit. Just kind of, I guess, what the Trivium and the Quadrivium look like.
Yeah, that's a good idea. If we have, yeah, is that okay, Larissa? If we have a little bit of time to
Go
maybe
ahead.
do that? Yeah.
Thank you. That'd be
So, yeah. So, well, I guess we could start by sort of looking at the Trivium. I think, as I mentioned in passing, you have the arts of grammar and logic and rhetoric that pertain to the Trivium, or that constitute the Trivium. And if you think about it, these are all arts that are in one way or another concerned with speech, right? Grammar and logic and rhetoric. And we've also fit in poetry as well. And a reason for doing that in the first year is because, as St. Thomas says in his Premium to the commentary on Aristotle's Posterior Analytics, he says that poetry is in a way a part of philosophy, part of logic, I should say. So he includes it there when he's giving the division of the different parts of logic and the different works of Aristotle that are in one way or another dedicated to logic. He includes poetry there as well. So we really focus in on how to argue. So Dr. Hattrip focused in his last class. He introduced students to, I think, the syllogism, which is the most perfect kind of argument. And right now in the rhetoric class, we're going through different kinds of arguments that are proper to rhetoric. And then we're going to look at poetry and how the poet, how he moves his audience to virtuous things through means that are proper to him. But all of these use speech. And we, in a very general way, get introduced to grammar through studying the Iliad and the Odyssey. We look at those two works as works of literature, but also works which, in some way or another, help us to begin to converse with each other about the highest and the most noble things. And yeah, so maybe that's kind of a very general introduction to some of the things that we get into in the first year when we look at the different parts of the trivium. Do you want to say something, Dr. Hatcher, about the quadrivium?
Yeah. I'll say a few words about that. So I guess the thing that strikes one about the quadrivium as opposed to the trivium when you get into it is its mathematical character. So, I think that's something that the cohort will discover as they move into year 2, is that there's a significant mathematical element to the development of this education. And it's interesting. It's an interesting feature of the liberal arts that you have 4 arts that do have that mathematical character. So the first 2 are geometry and arithmetic, which are the classical mathematical sciences. But then you have astronomy and music, which are interestingly characterized as mathematical disciplines. They wouldn't strike one maybe initially as mathematical disciplines. But there's a good reason for that, and it goes back, I think, to that idea of art that we were talking about earlier. So when you look at the world, its quantitative nature and its measurability are among the things that kind of strike us. And when you look at primary education, right, little kids are studying math from the time they're very little. And that's because mathematical ideas are very accessible to people on the whole. There's complex math out there that a lot of people aren't going to want to get into. But mathematics in itself isn't always complex. It's a very simple way in which the world appeals to us through its shape and its size, the dimensions that it shows us, and constantly, because mathematical ideas, again, that math is involved in the education of the very young, because mathematical ideas are accessible to us. It's a great way to start thinking about the world and to prepare the mind to start thinking about it philosophically. So in a way, maybe geometry and arithmetic speak to themselves, but maybe just speak for themselves. But maybe just a word about the astronomy and the music. When you look at those disciplines, you're thinking about things like the sun and the moon and the planets, but you're noticing a kind of mathematical order that exists there. And that mathematical order is something that you can talk about right away and get some satisfaction in thinking about. But I guess maybe the thing to emphasize there is that you are recognizing an order that exists in the world. When you're looking at astronomy, things don't happen haphazardly. They happen according to a rule. They happen according to a design. And you look at it and say, boy, is there a way that I could work out what that design is, what it looks like? Is there a way I could get into that? And when you call astronomy an art, that's one of the things you're getting at. So in the cohort, I think this is the kind of thing that we'll discover. A lot of what you're doing when you're doing the beginnings of astronomy, if you will, is modeling. Actually building a model in your mind, on paper, wherever you're doing it, that gives you a way of imaging what things like the sun and the planets are doing over the course of the year, over the course of the month, over the course of the day. And you recognize that model can actually make the thing very intelligible to me. And that's a neat way of approaching order as it appeals to us in the world. You turn to music, you look at that and you think about what's going on there. You start talking about basic musical experiences, things like intervals, like the sound that an octave makes, or the sound that a perfect fifth makes, or the sound that a perfect fourth makes. You start to recognize those sounds, and they're recognizable. They become familiar. They end up going into musical composition in all sorts of ways. But then when you're looking at it, you realize these things are actually governed by very simple mathematical ratios, like 2 to 1, or 3 to 2, or 4 to 3, simple whole number ratios. And when you start to recognize that those ratios are present in those musical sounds, you start to say, whoa, there's an order here that's lying underneath the surface that I didn't even know was there. And so as you go through those arts, you start to recognize that there's an order in the world, and that order is it's observable by us and it's expressible by us. We can speak very satisfactorily about the order that we're seeing there. And if there's anything that prepares the mind for doing philosophy, as far as I can see, it's becoming convinced that there's an order in the world that can be understood by the human mind, with a kind of a hope and a confidence that order is something that I could grasp, that I could put in words, that I could communicate to other people, that I could understand myself and communicate to other people. Yeah, so that's maybe just to speak to the mathematical aspect of the quadrivium, which is certainly a curious feature of it, maybe especially when you're looking at the astronomy and the music there.
And if I could kind of piggyback on that, Joe, and just kind of go back to the trivium for a second, just to kind of show that there are some of the same things that you mentioned in the trivium, or sorry, in the quadrivium, present in the trivium. You can see how just as insofar as the arts of the quadrivium are concerned with a kind of making, so too with the arts of the trivium. Like we could say in grammar, we're concerned with making correct speech, right, with putting together a correct sentence. And we see, of course, someone like Homer model that for us, time and again, in a beautiful way. And then in logic, for example, right, we learn how to construct correct arguments of different sorts. And this goes all the way into poetry. So we're concerned with making things, but we're also concerned, of course, with order here. So there's an order that our cohort members have already learned. There's an order that has to be present in the premises of a syllogism if a conclusion is really to follow, if that syllogism is to be a real syllogism, a genuine one, right? That sort of thing. So there's a making that's involved in all of the arts of the trivium, and we're also concerned with seeing order as well. And it's interesting, as you described it, Dr. Hadrup, as you move into the quadrivium, you start focusing, it seems, more on things, maybe in some sense less on speech, but you're focusing more on things and looking at orders that are there in things. And that, of course, prepares you then to enter into the secrets of philosophy in year 3.
Yeah, one famous observation about those, I guess, is that astronomy, as a liberal art, prepares you for, in many important respects, for natural philosophy. But then music, on the other hand, prepares you in many important respects for ethics. So there's some direct lines of preparation that are happening in some of those quadrivium studies. At the beginning of his Almagest, Ptolemy argues that astronomy is a great preparation for theology too. They're dealing with realities that are much more fixed and orderly, and in a certain respect eternal than a lot of the matters we're generally concerned with in life.
Our first year cohort they have no idea what's coming next year. They're so lucky to be starting that with you. It's gonna be such a good year. Oh man, hearing you talk, like, this is so good. Sorry, Dr. Arias, do you want to say anything else about that before I move on?
No, feel free, Larissa.
Okay, I just briefly want to touch on, I know last year we had some questions about the schedule. So I just want to very briefly go over what the schedule is going to look like. So we said it's a 3-year program, and each year is 4 terms, and each term is 8 weeks. So pretty much, I'm pretty sure every year will start probably the first week after Labor Day in September is when the fall semester will start. It will go for 8 weeks, take about a month off. The second one will start, go for 8 weeks, take about a month off, start the third one, take a month off, and then start the final one before you take this. I think the final one ends in maybe July, and then you have August, and then you'll start the second year, which is the Quadrivium, and then it'll be the same pattern again. 8 weeks on, a month off, 8 weeks on, roughly a month off. That obviously varies with holidays and, months. And then so that it goes that way for 3 years. And the day of the week does vary, but we try to keep it as consistent as possible. It sort of depends on what the senior fellows have available, but usually Dr. Arias, he teaches on Monday. So even though it may have been Tuesday with Dr. Hattrip, you can sort of count on the fact that Dr. Arias will be doing it on Mondays. That's not, I don't want to like sign you up for Mondays for the rest of your life. It's not necessarily the case, but you can sort of, it is fairly consistent senior fellow to senior fellow, but the day of the week does change just slightly, term to term, depending on who's teaching it. Any questions about that? Did that make sense? Those remind me, it won't necessarily be, you're not going to be finding out the day of the week the term before. It's usually, we do try to get the whole schedule worked out at least, year by year for the most part. So it's not going to be, oh, I didn't know it was starting on Monday. Anything like that. It's a little more planned out than that. But, because Drs. Hattrip and Arias do have full-time jobs at colleges, there does need to be some flexibility and grace for them. Oh, I will just add that we are offering a promotion. So anybody who refers a friend and their friend adds on, you will get a $50 Visa gift card. So tell your friends about the cohort. If they sign up, well, you both have to be signed up. Let us know and you'll get a gift card as a thank you for referring your friend. Anything else? Okay.
I want to thank Ryan for coming tonight. It's great to see you, Ryan. Thanks for coming.
Good to see you too, Dr. Hattrip. I look forward to, taking the next class with you when that comes.
Absolutely.
Oh, and you know what? Actually, I will add one thing. Against any, prospective cohort number 2. I think this program is really worthwhile, just because again, the things that we're exposed to, most of us might not even thought were something to be exposed to in the first place. It's, to me, it's just been it's been a great experience again, walking through this. Now it's crazy to think that it's going to almost be a year here in a few months that I've been with the same group. So yeah, I think it's really worthwhile, and you'll be able to receive some, like, the things you receive are like worth more than what you are giving in return, I think is what I'll say. And again, Dr. Hattrip and Dr. Arias are great teachers.
Thank you, Ryan.
By the way, on the note of the unexpected, let me just say this for anybody listening. When we get to the astronomy and music courses in the Quadrivium, those sound kind of technical, but the point of the liberal approach to those things is that you're dealing with a knowledge that's accessible to everybody, and it's not, consequently, it's not, there's not going to be an emphasis on technicality so much as on broad human experience. And we will be reading some philosophers and connections. So there's going to be some Plato in those classes, and I've always found those just really really wonderful experiences. Kind of watching the Platonic mind engage questions like the order of sound and the order of motion in the cosmos and things like that. So it'll be a philosophical rather than a technical experience, and I think that's an important thing to be aware of. Very lots of wonderful ideas to engage there.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, and I was just going to say, and I think Dr. Hattrip would agree with this, that year 1, it's designed to prepare students for year 2. So they should go into year 2 confident. They'll be able to, get through the mathematical and the musical and the astronomical. So yeah, they shouldn't have any any qualms about being able to do that. And Dr. Hatchup, who's I think going to be very involved in year 2. Yeah, he's a great teacher, and he's going to lead you guys from beginning to end well. So I wish I could be a fly on the wall, but
Yeah, it's a pretty remarkable program. John and Brian and everybody involved did a very amazing job putting this together. And like I said at the beginning, poaching our great senior fellows who, like I said, have jobs and busy lives, and they're still committed to this for all of you. So, please consider joining us. If you have any questions at all, you can email the email address that's on the website, magnusinstitute.org. Please just, yeah, we're here to answer any of your questions, and you can register right on the website as well. Have a great night, everybody. Thank you so much.